It should be written as a procedure, not as kind of a something in a paragraph or stuff like that, because user manuals are always good and user friendly, and obviously complemented with lots of visuals and stuff, to comprehend the text more easily, because when you have a visual, it gives you a more clarity on what's being said. So
Absolutely.
that's basically how you should write a user manual, and that's what I do. And during all this process, I make sure that it goes through the DDLC.
Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Syed Haroon Shah, Senior Technical Writer at Edetek. Welcome, Haroon, to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited about this interview. And I'm doing really good. How about you?
I'm doing super. Thank you for asking, Haroon. So let's start with a very quick introduction and just tell us about how did you end up being a senior technical writer? How did it all start? Who inspired you? Just a small introduction, please.
Okay, so it's kind of a very interesting story. So I actually come from a petroleum geoscience background. So while I was doing my master's in Norway in petroleum geosciences, I was working on my final thesis, and my professor he gave me, like, very complex tools to interpret my data on that. So, and I had no idea about those tools. So what happened, like, I was just trying to learn the software, as much as I can, but I was finding it's really difficult to, get the insights on that product. So one little button on the right top corner of the application, that's the health file, that literally changed my life. So when I explored that, it's basically the online health, right? And when I saw that, it literally, made my life so easy. And after going through all the manuals and stuff that was provided in the content, I finished my thesis way before the deadline. And when my supervisor saw my thesis, he was like amazed, like, how did you do that? And then I told him about this online help and stuff. Then I started researching on who are the people who start writing these documents, and who are the people involved in this content generation. Then I came up with the names like technical writer, product documentation specialist, information developer. So what I did, I asked my supervisor to, kind of um, take responsibility of the student assistant. And what I did was I started creating small manuals for the students, and my supervisor used to send all the students to me. He's the guy, he knows the software, just go to him and he'll give you all the information. So from that, I started working on manuals. It really inspired me, because that was something that really helped me, right? It saved a lot of time. So that's how I started writing manuals. Obviously that was not counted as kind of an experience, it was just my own kind of, this enthusiasm on writing stuff. So when I came back to my home country, I never applied for a geologist or a geoscientist. Luckily I got into an oil and gas company. It's called 𝐊𝐚𝐤𝐲 in Pakistan. It operates all over the world. So I worked there as a technical writer. Since I had this background knowledge of the oil and gas, so I got selected. I got lucky, and since then I've been working as a tech writer. I have worked for numerous SaaS products, numerous industries, name it. Like currently, I'm working on the pharmaceutical industry. It's an all IT. I worked for the government sector. I've worked in the health sector. I've worked in the shipping sector as well. So this is how I got into technical writing.
Wow, what a good story. Great story, Haroon. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
it's very inspiring to see how somebody's help document has helped you, and you are now helping so many people
Yeah.
out there. That's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about user manuals in particular, because that's where the whole story starts, right? And user manuals are there for a reason. It makes our life so much easier. Now, what is the best way to write an introduction for the user manual?
So first of all, so I have already worked for the companies, right? So I have worked for the corporate clients, SaaS products, right? So the most important thing is to first understand the software. That's the first thing you need to do whenever you get into the company. You need to get into the QA environment, and you have to collaborate with the QA and support, how software is going to perform the following functionality, right? That's the first thing you need to do. And when it comes to writing, right? So obviously we have so many project management softwares, with all the BAs, even the product architects. I have also worked as a product architect. I used to write user stories, like defining the logic, how basically this functionality will work.
Mhm.
So first thing is getting the basic functionality structure of what's going to happen in this particular feature. Then you need to understand the business logic first, because and understand the audience as well. So what kind of audience is it? Are you writing for the external audience, internal audience? It might be too technical for the internal audience, but not too technical for the external ones, right? So you have to be very, very precise on that. So when you decide that, you have to create a very basic draft of the business logic, right? And then you start the flow by connecting this top level business logic with all the contents that are you going to develop or you're going to write in your user manual. So that's how basically you do, and it should be written as a procedure, not as kind of a something in a paragraph or stuff like that, because user manuals are always good and user friendly, and obviously complemented with lots of visuals and stuff, to comprehend the text more easily, because when you have a visual, it gives you more clarity on what's being said. So
Absolutely.
that's basically how you should write a user manual, and that's what I do. And during all this process, I make sure that it goes through the DDLC. Normally we talk about SDLC, people don't talk about the DDLC. That's a document development lifecycle. So it should go through all the review flows, review cycles, so that the document is validated and becomes the one single source of truth for the internal or the external stakeholders. Yeah.
Wow, that's nice. I like the word DDLC. Right. So, by the way you talk and the choice of words you're using shows how much passionate you're about this whole area. Now, please
Yeah.
help me understand. You spoke about a lot of audiences. You need to understand who's going to read the content you're writing. Based on the audience, you've got to choose the words, choose the way you represent the information. Right now, what kind of user manuals do you work regularly, or I know it varies from project to project, but what's the general kind of user manual you worked? And also, if you can help us understand the different types of user manuals a bit more, that will help us, Harun.
So the basic one is to understand the entire application. For example, if I'm talking about one particular functionality, I'll start with its high level topic. That's going to be the business, that explain the business logic and what's happening at the back end, right? We normally explain the front end, right? So
Yeah.
first I give the logic, like what's happening in the back end. You are doing all the things on the front end, but you should know what's kind of logic is being applied at the back end. So I give, like, for example, different visuals from the, let's say, tables, Excel files, create some Excel files just to give a comparison of this value will be converted into this value. For example, if I'm talking about certain configurations that you need to do to convert a certain data format into one, so how the system's going to perform that, right? So that's the first part, and then it comes to that application. Like, okay, now I have explained the business logic, the backend processes. Now we are coming towards the front end, that is the application user interface, right? How are you going to perform that? So I go step by step, selecting the functionality and then explaining all the elements in the dialogue, what they do and what do you select in order to do a perform a certain function or certain operation. So that's how it goes into. And let's say if it has some exceptions, some important stuff, I do add some additional visuals. For example, adding in different kind of admonitions, for example, a tip, an important note, right? A kind of a caution, right? So it is something that really attracts the user. Okay, I need to do that. And also giving some real-time example, that is really important. If you don't have the real-time data and you're not explaining that your functionality with the real case scenarios, then I think the the trust you develop in the documentation gets little bit lower. So if you give the real time examples, that's really good. So that's basically one thing that I work on. So I normally work on the front end and the back end user manuals. Now coming to these some manuals, you cannot call them manuals. There are some documents that we say, the API documentation, right? API document is kind of technical stuff, right? So, and that's where the challenge begins for a technical writer, like how to perform, how to provide the content for the things that can be understood by a layman. We have so many technical terms in APIs, right? And also these are stuff that are normally made for the internal users, for example, the developers, for the customer experience team, so that they can provide all the stuff to the support and the external clients. Also, I've worked on some deployment guides and system architectures. So these are also some guides like how a system will perform. Let's say in the architecture document, I write the entire architecture of the system, like how this system is based. Like for
Mhm.
example, its backend structure, what kind of database it will use, the front end structure, for example, HTML, CSS, Java, TypeScript, what kind of backend like Postgre, SQL, all that stuff, right? So this is something that is all intended for the developers as well. I've also worked on some integration guides. So integration guides are, for example, if a company has a suite of applications, like it has like 16 applications, and its processes cannot be run independently. It has to be integrated from A to Z, like from all the applications, right? So let's say if a new employee joins the company, he needs to know, okay, how am I gonna do a particular operation? So he
Mhm.
needs to run that full flow guide, right,
Yeah.
in order to see how each application works in its own domain and how he can get the results. So this is
Mhm.
something also that is intended for the newly onboards stuff, kind of that. I have also worked on the release notes. So
Yeah.
release notes basically, it's not a kind of user manual. It's just only for the external clients. Also for the internal clients, we add the issues as well, like incidents, known incidents, resolved incidents. That can also be, based on uh, client's request. We can also, send those to them. So these are kind of documents that I work on. So, and specifically user manuals, yeah, that I've told you previously.
Yeah, we spoke quite a lot about visuals being present or being the major component in the user manual so that it's much more easier to follow. Now, recently, I just came across a post where they mentioned that the user manuals for Lego are so much easier than IKEA. Now, in your own opinion, what do you think is the main reason for this? And you already spoke a lot about some tips and tricks that you adapt to make user manuals interactive. So, would you be able to give a bit more tips on how you can make those user manuals more interesting to read?
Yeah, so images play a big role. Visuals play a big role. For example, if you have a user interface, I've also worked on applications that do not have a user interface,
Mhm.
right? It runs at the back end, right? So how you will explain those processes? Like for example, if the data is kind of being injected into one system and it getting retrieved by another system, so how are you gonna show the flow,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And you don't have the UI of that application. So that's where it becomes really tricky. And that's the point where you need to introduce visuals with different annotations. We have so many different annotating tools. Let's say we have some visual tools that provide a very, very flexible kind of annotation that you can apply additionally on your images. Also, you can use any other, if you're an expert in some Adobe suite, so you can always do that on your own. So obviously it brings value to your documentation. If you see a documentation, if you compare two documentation, for example, one documentation without the visuals and the images and one with the images, you will see a lot of different people will try to comprehend it more easily, the
Yeah.
one that has the visuals. Also, to make it more appealing, you need to add some admonitions. For example, I have worked with a lot of authoring tools. For example, starting from Adobe RoboHelp, I worked on it. I have worked on Confluence, right? So they also have these, admonitions that you can apply. So that is why authoring tools play a very, very big role in your content development, right? So you can add so many things. For example, you can create a context sensitive help. You can add so many things. For example, gloss terms. You can cross-link different topics from one topic to another, right? So you don't have to repeat your information, on and on, right?
Yeah.
Repetition also creates kind of a very, very, it becomes very overwhelming for the reader, right? So it should have all those elements, within your content to make it look more appealing. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's very true that visuals and other additional elements play a lot big role in your content development and visualization. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of thoughts on the particular topic of user manuals. And I fully agree with you. A user manual could put somebody to use that product to a larger extent, and at the same time you could become haters of the same product if you don't have the right tools and helping guides to assist you. So absolutely, you spoke the right things when it comes to creating the right level of user manual, because sometimes too much information is also not too good, too little is also not too good. You need to find that optimal balance, what
Yeah,
keeps
true.
the reader motivating. Now, I just would like to move on to the rapid fire round questions, Haran. So, looks like you read quite a lot of content. You're a very active community player as well in the tech community writers place forum. Now, please share us some documents that has inspired you, particularly documentation related resources that you have read recently or watched, um, that would help our audiences.
First, kind of participate in different kind of summits that happen. For example, on LinkedIn, I have joined many kind of organizations, tech writer organizations. So they have events, the technical writer summits, or also some events called uh, writing docs kind of stuff, right? So
Yeah.
this is something that I think people should attend, because there are so many professionals out there. I do have like 7+ experience, but there are people out there who have like 25, 30+ experience in writing. So I think the best you can get is from an individual who is already in the industry, right?
Mhm.
You have articles, you have a lot of stuff going on, you have companies who have like great documentation, right? But the most important thing in what I feel is to talk to the professionals, because they know what are the gaps in the documentation. They have been through this process their entire life, right? So talking to them, I think, is more reliable than, I think, going to any resource. Because if you search Google documentation, you'll get a very good documentation. If you go to, let's say, some authoring tools that are
Mhm.
giving their clients their authoring, obviously they have a very good documentation, very precise, very clear, to understand. But I think meeting people, professionals, by participating in the tech writing events is very much valuable. So that's very basically what I follow.
That's great. Now, when I say the word documentation, what is that one word that comes to your mind?
There are a lot of words, but I think one thing that comes to my mind is clarity.
Clarity. That's very sweet, but yeah, lot to add to that.
Yeah.
Now, my last question to you is, what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
It's been quite some time that I've been in technical writing, right? So the piece of advice that I always give to, like, it's not, kind of, I can specify that, okay, I'll give to my 20-year-old self. I'll give it to everyone who's in the industry, or who's planning to get into technical writing. Is The advice is to learn these authoring tools and the project management softwares as early as possible. Obviously it will enhance and provide you better career opportunities in your life.
Brilliant. As we all expected, this is going to be a great episode, and you have shared quite a lot of information with us in this last 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Now, if I'm not asked you anything in particular, is there anything you would like to share at this point of time?
My question, basically, it's kind of a question to the tech writing industry, right? Like, for example, people sometimes ask me, like, in 10 years, where do you see yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we are technical writers. We work with so many, people in the industry, subject matter experts, BAs, product owners, and sometimes with the director level employees as well. But my question too is, like, like, people do ask me this question, like, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? So I just want to provide this answer, because I never got this answer myself. But when I started working as a technical writer, I got to understand that I'm a very important part of the entire process, right? So if someone tells you, like, how do you see yourself in 5 years, so I would definitely say that I can be a very good project manager.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because with the authoring tools, We also are part of the Scrum meetings, Scrum planning, Scrum review, Scrum retrospective. We are also following the Agile methodology, right? So being a part of that particular process, it makes us very good, project manager. We also know how the Scrum Master is handling
Yeah.
the projects, delegating the tasks from the backlog. And we are constantly in the phase of testing as well. We also work as a QA testers. We have to manually test the application in order to write it, right? So
Yeah.
we are not just technical writers, we are BAs, we are QAs, we are project managers, and on top we are technical writers. That because sometimes in the company people don't think good about the technical writers, because they say documentation is very simple.
Yeah.
Everybody can do that, but that's not the thing, right? There are so many things that you need to think on, right? There is kind of a language that you need to use. You need to understand the audience. There is a formulated
Mm.
DDLC that you need to follow. There is a specific style guide that you need to follow in order to ensure consistency throughout the company's documentation. So there are a lot of stuff that a technical writer does. And I just want to tell people that, we are not just technical writers. We are
Yeah.
a hub of every
Everything.
every every role. Yeah.
Very well said, Harun. Yeah, yeah. As you said, gone are the days where the documentation team comes at the end and then writes some content and then releases as part of the release cycle. You've got to get involved right from the beginning to understand how the product works. And then you already very well said, you've got to understand the psychology of the people who's going to be consuming your content. Otherwise, it might become too technical or too less information for the readers to understand. So
Yeah.
absolutely. So thank you so much for joining this podcast series and sharing your unique experiences with us, Haran. I would say 7+ years is not something that we should take lightly. And all the very best for the upcoming projects and the user manuals or documentation you're going to be creating. And thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.